The 60s. Hippies, Woodstock, turbulent political debate. There really was no other decade quite like it. The public eye was focused on many things, cultural sensations that dared to be different and have now reached legendary status, almost creating subcultures of their own, and to this day are still popular with seasoned fans and newcomers alike. Which leads me nicely onto Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the seminal album from the band that defined the 60s and redefined pop culture as we know it. So let's hit play and get into it. It opens with the sound of an orchestra tuning up to create the feel of being in a concert hall, and the first song kicks in, a hard-hitting ensemble-sung introduction, complete with memorable horn sections, perfect arrangement and guitar tones to die for, a perfect way to start off the record. Then spilling over into A Little Help From My Friends, a Ringo sang number which again has all four members sing parts, encompassing memorable drum fills and at the same time being amazingly catchy. The first two tracks really have to be viewed as one piece in my opinion. You can't really have one without the other. After this is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, an unforgettable number filled with the psychedelic imagery painting a dreamscape within the listeners' minds. An unconventional yet brilliantly executed change of pace topped off with seamless transitions from verse to chorus, complete with an in-your-face snare drum. Following is Getting Better, which starts off with the main hook, which isn't something you hear that often, especially within the Beatles catalogue. Another catchy number filled with brilliant playing by all the members. After is Fixing a Hole, which is probably the weakest song on the record, not because it's bad, but purely because it doesn't really stand up all that well compared to the other songs. But besides this, McCartney's vocals are on top form within the song. Playing afterwards is She's Leaving Home, a change of pace and a more emotional number, encaptivated by a harp and string section which really sell the tone and tell the story well. Next on is Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, again defying expectations with the sounds of circus instrumentation and imagery inspired by a show poster of all things. Much like the others, it transitions between instrumental and vocal sections flawlessly. The follow-up being Within You Without You, and honestly, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was on the wrong record. It sounds nothing like anything else that appears on the album. Taking influence from classical Indian music and including Western inspiration makes for a unique track, and I'm just going to say this now, George is an underrated Beatle. Coming after is When I'm 64, and this is one of the first ever Beatles songs I knew, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And quite simply, it's something of an anthem for the working man. It describes the walk of life for most people, and the horn arrangement is just icing on the cake. After Still is Lovely Rita, which to be honest is kinda corny, but it just works and manages to be catchy as well. Nothing really feels out of place within the song. Playing next is Good Morning, complete with unique vocal effects and even sound effects, topped off with a brilliant guitar solo. The penultimate track is Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Reprise. Much akin to the opener, it follows the tropes of having the whole band sing and being another loud, hard rock number whilst retaining the catchy feel of the previous tracks. And finally, to close us off after another spillover, the Pièce de Résistance, A Day in the Life, a melancholy feel that escalates with a climactic orchestral build-up into a more upbeat number, then transitioning back into the sombre tone, and finally finishing off with yet another build-up to end on a piano chord. And in one last stretch, the sound of a record tricking the audience into thinking their record keeps jumping. And speak about going out on a high note, I could honestly make an entire video dissecting A Day in the Life. They literally invented prog rock with it, accompanied by perfect arrangements and playing from all the members. It makes for a musical piece that is something really quite divine. But let's discuss the album as a whole. There's so many things that this record does so well, it's near impossible to know where to begin. It quickly establishes the idea that the Beatles are performing as Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and has been cited by many as the first ever concept album. And in doing so, there is really nothing else quite like it that has the impact or still holds the legacy that this one has. The heights they scaled and boundaries pushed basically redefined what was possible to achieve within the space of a single LP. Whilst Revolver featured plenty of cutting-edge techniques, Sgt. Pepper really was a huge leap above and beyond. Every song has something different to offer and you never really feel like it's getting repetitive. You can immediately identify each song from another, and every track has at least one thing in it that defies some kind of convention. Because after Revolver, the only real way to go was bigger and bolder than before. It did many things first that we now take for granted in music. It was the first album to feature printed lyrics for the listener to scour over whilst listening, and also to have tracks spill over into each other, which is now commonplace within many records to this day. And above all, it made the art of making albums far more popular than just releasing singles and essentially collections of songs. Honestly, it's hard to overstate what a monumental achievement the album was to all involved, not just the Beatles themselves, but without George Martin's expert production, the album may not be what we know it as today, and without its less than conventional album cover designed by Jan Horwath and Peter Blake, it wouldn't stand out as much as it does amongst other records. This album really is the full package as far as the Beatles experience goes, has brilliant harmonies, songs and arrangements, and to a newcomer this is probably a good starting point. Whilst it's not my favourite, it's certainly in the top 5 and was one that made me really get into their catalogue, and just thinking about how the album was made is simply mind-boggling. For context, Please Please Me took about 14 hours to record and was done in one day, whereas Sgt. Pepper took over 500 hours and several months. It was also kind of strange in the sense that it didn't feature any singles within the track listing, but honestly, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane just wouldn't have fit in anywhere. So how do I leave a parting thought on this? I've heard it described as not their best album, but their most important album, and I completely agree with that statement. Popular music simply wouldn't be the same without it. I can almost guarantee that pretty much any rock band to come about after this album has been influenced by it, whether directly or indirectly. And in a way, Sgt. Pepper kind of marks the end of an era for the Beatles. It was the last one to be released within Brian Epstein's lifetime, and the final one to be recorded before they all started to fall apart and clash in the studio. And for that alone we should cherish it. But is this album a masterpiece? Well, on many grounds I'd have to say yes it is, but ultimately that accolade is up to you to assign. Well, I think that about covers it. Signing off.